I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're finishing our coverage of the Game Boy Zelda titles as I rank the dungeons of Oracle of Ages. Now compared to Seasons, the dungeon design here has a richer balance between combat and puzzle, which I heavily prefer. We have some fun new mechanics like the cube rolling puzzles, the coloured tile rooms, and the return of some classics from Seasons like the minecarts and the turnstiles. Now, due to the nature of my Ages playthrough being a linked game, I was able to experience the Hero's Cave mini-dungeon in its difficult entirety. It won't be included on this list as it is an optional experience that doesn't end in any boss fights, but I'll say if you want to be challenged to the limit in terms of how to use your items effectively, give it a try. There's one in Seasons as well, but I'm not replaying that game to try an optional dungeon with no boss fight at the end. Hopefully you understand. With all that being said, all 9 Oracle of Ages dungeons ranked. Let me know your favourite down below. At number 9, we have the Black Tower, the final dungeon of the game. Like in Seasons, the stronghold of the final boss just doesn't hold a candle to the puzzling nature of the main dungeons throughout Labrynna, but unlike Onox's castle, the Black Tower is at least a more thematic location, given you visited it multiple times during the game. Verin, as a villain, benefited so much from being actively involved in the plot, and the concept of this tower that stretches into the heavens is super cool. The first half is entirely based around fighting through hordes of enemies to reach the upper half of the dungeon, and this is how Onox's castle should have done it. We have a feeling of progression instead of going through identically looping rooms, and once we reach the second half of the dungeon, we're introduced to a staircase puzzle that has you fighting through wizrobes and dark nuts to reach the top floor where the boss takes place. It's still the worst dungeon in the game, but that's fine. 2D Zeldas have never ended on their best dungeons, with the exception of maybe the Great Palace from Adventure of Link. At number 8, we have the Spirit's Grave, the first dungeon of the game. A rather easy affair, which makes sense, first dungeon and all that. You end up going in a counterclockwise journey around the grave, with no real diversion throughout. The boss key is actually in the room right next to the start of the dungeon, but is blocked by a jar. And you know what that means, it's power bracelet time! So you make your way through the simple puzzles of the dungeon to reach the dungeon item, and then you loop back around to the start to collect the boss key. Because of the linearity, even compared to Oracle of Seasons' first dungeon, I think Spirit's Grave gets a bad rap. There's no way to take the wrong path here, which can be a negative if you want a challenge, or a positive if you want to be gently led into this game's systems. For some reason, we're introduced to the cube puzzle near the start of the dungeon via a puzzle you can't fail, but for some reason we never get a harder variant of this in this dungeon. So why introduce it here? There's this room with oddly placed statues that makes me think there's a puzzle here, but you just kill a Genie and move on. I like this room where depending on which side you go via the block puzzle, you'll either summon a chest with a button or summon a moving platform, and the only way to actually complete the room is to summon the moving platform first. I thought it was cute. The mini-boss and the main boss of the dungeon are both on theme, a great Genie ghost who can slow your movement with his smaller spirits, as well as the goofy pumpkin head who almost took me out because I suck at avoiding projectiles and I was feeling a little #cocky. Ultimately, Spirit's Grave just doesn't really do that much. It introduces concepts we won't come back to until the next dungeon, and I just think that's bad design. At number 7, we have the Crown Dungeon, the 5th dungeon of the game. Depending on your enjoyment of this dungeon's central gimmick, this could be much higher for you, dear viewers, as this dungeon revolves around the red and blue coloured switches, and I've seen other people's rankings. I know the fanbase quite enjoys this one. We've seen the coloured switches a ton while covering 2D Zelda, and it's to the point where, at least for me, they don't carry dungeons like they used to. I've seen this gimmick so many times, I want something new, something more exciting to play with. My favourite little part of the dungeon is the upper half, where you have to use the switches and ensure you have enough keys to make your way through to the top part of the crown, which eventually leads to the boss key room with a fun statue-pushing puzzle to solve that I really liked. I also vibed with this brief seed shooting puzzle where you need to bounce a seed off all 3 statues to progress. It wasn't easy to get the right angle, but once I managed it, I felt fantastic. The Cane of Samaria is the item of this dungeon, which can summon an extra block in the environment. This is best used during the boss fight with Smog, which ends up being its own dungeon puzzle, but it can also be used to hold down switches and provide cover against the various Beamos beams. Ultimately, the Crown Dungeon's main challenge comes from navigating to the correct locations by raising and lowering the blocks, and it just doesn't lead to anything memorable. And it doesn't help that the Crown Dungeon is sandwiched between two of the better dungeons in the game, the Skull Dungeon and Mermaid's Cave, so in that sense it was always going to be an uphill battle. And when combined with one of the worst music tracks I've had the displeasure of listening to in Zelda's catalogue, yeah. Seriously, who thought this was a good idea? There's no rhythm or pace to it, it's crazy bus energy. At number 6, we have the Wing Dungeon, the second dungeon of the game. Compared to the Spirit's Grave, which teased us with potential puzzles only to never deliver, the Wing Dungeon actually does give us some fun, coloured challenges to solve. The cubes finally get use with 2 different rooms. The first has the player rolling a cube around to match the red tiles near this torch. It's tricky enough and requires you to not roll the cube into an area where you can't roll it back. Did you hear that, Billy? Do not roll it into the upper wall. What are you doing, Billy, you idiot? The other form of the cube puzzle is this minecart room, where it needs to land on the button with the blue side up, which allows the barrier on the tracks to raise. With the acquisition of the Rock's Feather, we also gain access to coloured platforms, where if you jump on them, they'll change colour. It provides a few fun puzzles like this one, where you need to match the red tiles with the yellow and blue block pattern nearby. Or how about this puzzle, where you need to replicate a statue formation with your own set of statues? I really liked this concept a lot. The boss key can also be found in a colour-based room, where you have to jump on the central platform to change the floor colour, revealing a series of slimes. If they then change back into the same colour as the floor, they become invulnerable, so you have a limited window to do damage. Pretty cool. The mini-boss and boss here are good enough. They fit the theme of the dungeon by both being flying creatures, Swoop being a fun time as you attack him while avoiding the pits he creates, and the Headflomp being a love it or hate it timing-based boss that feels so unique compared to anything else I've seen in Zelda, probably because he comes from Mario. Wing Dungeon doesn't do too much, but the fact it does so much more than the Spirit's Grave really boosts it up in the rankings. At number 5, we have Jabu Jabu's Belly, the 7th dungeon of the game. Now this is a controversial pick, as you have defenders of this dungeon who really love the confusing layout and the water level gimmick that allows you to explore floors from a completely different perspective, while others consider this the worst dungeon in the game for the same reasons. The water gimmick and re-exploring old areas to find new secrets can lead to a lot of unintentional backtracking even when you don't need to. It's often hard to figure out where to go next, and I fell into that camp. I got very lost and very confused after changing the water level for the first time, and I remember it being a real struggle to find the area where the mini-boss is. But I can tell the maze-like design of this dungeon had a lot of thought put into it. It's just a pain that if you accidentally go backwards, you have to do so much backtracking to get the water levels right again so you can progress forwards. The dungeon revolves around the switch hook, with the dungeon item being the long switch, a length upgrade that allows for easier switching from further away. Honestly, the switch hook is one of the best items in the 2D series. It's a hookshot, but you swap with the item or enemy you grab. Once this upgrade is obtained, the dungeon gets more linear, with there only being a certain amount of switching points to explore, but it never stops feeling satisfying to pull it off. The boss key was a bit of a letdown though. It's locked behind 3 doors, meaning you need to find 3 different keys to access it. Which means if you're a key down, you have to backtrack through the whole dungeon to figure out what you missed, which can be extremely tedious. Other water dungeons, like in the 3D games, have this issue too, but I find them easier to navigate and make a mental map of. At least we have the compass in this game to show us which rooms still have treasure, but I can't help feeling that Jabu Jabu's Belly was a momentum stopper for my playthrough. Thus, it lands smack in the middle of the list because while I dislike the backtracking, I really like the overall puzzle design. And also, the anglerfish and the main boss are mid as fuck, so it gets the mid placement. At number 4, we have Mermaid's Cave, the 6th dungeon of the game. Will this one be controversial? It might be. I really like the idea of the Mermaid's Cave. It's a dungeon where you have to enter it both in the present and in the past to make meaningful progress, and immediately being greeted by some really mysterious music gets you in the zone. It's one of my favourite 2D water themes we've had in the series. The present contains the dungeon item, the mermaid suit, which allows Link to swim in deeper water and even dive beneath, which are required skills for navigating the Mermaid's Cave in the past, as the only way to reach the area with the boss is to completely dive under the water and through a few puzzle rooms. I really like how you have to navigate choppy waters and fend off enemies to find the next point where you can resurface. We've also got the return of the turnstiles, with there being a duo of them in the present that you need to carefully manipulate to make progress towards the mini-boss, Via. Yeah, he's back, and he's about as interesting as he was in Seasons. Octagon challenges your skills with the seed shooter and your ability to dive underwater to do meaningful damage. I like the rooms where when you hit the switch, it changes the floor layout, forcing you to memorize and pay attention as you progress through. And we get a bit of fun right before the boss with those rotating sticks you use to help angle your seed shooter shots. Overall, I don't have any complaints about Mermaid's Cave, but I do feel looking back that it's not got as much to talk about as I expected, and that's what keeps it out of my top 3. At number 3, we have the Skull Dungeon, the 4th dungeon of the game. I'm almost certain this was an asset flip from when these games were remaking the original NES title, as it very much reminds me of Zelda 1's Death Mountain, both with its map shape and with the lava theming, and the fact it's found in the top left portion of the overworld where Spectacle Rock probably was going to be. It feels like a final dungeon, and yet it's only midway through the game. Like with the Spirit's Grave, the Skull Dungeon is an ultimately linear experience, but it makes up for that linearity by providing some genuine puzzle elements. You've got some tough enemies to fight, like Stalfos and Armos Knights, there are blade traps waiting to strike you at a moment's notice, and if you're like me, you probably fell into the lava more times than you care to admit. This was the dungeon where I was most concerned about dying and having to redo so much in the form of progress, because they make you do a lot before you get the mini-boss in the switch hook, which provides a real challenge. They do introduce the concept of these tiled rooms, where you need to create a continuous path that changes every tile to the same colour without stepping on any previous ones, which is fun enough, with the one prior to the boss store room being extremely difficult. I was here for a while. And I love the puzzle to get the boss key with the switch hook, as you really have to think about which items you're switching if you want to make it out of this room, since you need to hold down this button to spawn in the chest in the first place. The minecarts get a solid amount of time dedicated to them, and the less I say about the perilous green platform parkour the better. I was awful at it. 2 really good mini-boss and boss encounters against the Armos warrior and his levitating sword, and Eyesore, who clearly was Patra in disguise. Further proof this was totally Death Mountain near the start of development. It also has an absolute bop of a theme, which goes far harder than it has any right to for a Game Boy track, which is serious praise from me because I honestly don't find the Oracle soundtracks that good. At number 2, we have Moonlit Grotto, the 3rd dungeon of the game. Another remnant of the switch from remake to a new game, we have a moon-shaped dungeon, just like Level 2 in the original NES title. But this is nothing like Level 2. This is a beast of a dungeon. I love the overgrown ruin vibe that the Moonlit Grotto has. There's grass and foliage growing all throughout, and you get the sense this place could collapse at any moment. There's an eeriness here, but the warmer colour scheme invites you in further. We have the return of the turnstiles, where on the upper floor you need to smash 4 crystals, which causes the turnstile you've been using to then drop to the lower floor. I love this. It's a good way of gatekeeping the path to the boss key, and gives the player a memorable set piece to play with. You need to find the seed shooter at the top of the upper floor of the dungeon, and this allows for a lot of creative puzzle design once you get it. The seed shooter fires seeds in the direction you're facing, and they'll bounce off the walls all crazy-like. Just firing seeds in a diagonal pattern was groundbreaking to me, as I'm not used to that in my old 2D Zeldas. Then combine the shooter with the various panels you can find that help to angle your shots, and I can see such interesting puzzle design beginning to form. By the time you reach the boss key, you've become a pro at aiming the seed shooter, allowing you to take on the really fun boss fight. The Shadow Hag actually utilizing the dungeon item as the way to defeat her is so 3D Zelda coded, yet she has the challenge so that even if you know what you need to do, you still have to actively have the skill to stay alive, dodge her shadows, and fire those seeds back into her. The shortcuts here are also really well designed, and the enemy variety isn't too difficult to handle. With the pain it takes to actually get into this dungeon via Crescent Island and the Tokay questline, I'm just glad Moonlit Grotto and its absolute banger soundtrack managed to stick the landing. And at number 1, we have the Ancient Tomb, the 8th dungeon of the game, and my personal favourite from both Oracle games. I've always loved a vertical dungeon with a ton of floors to explore. The Ancient Tomb works because you're constantly working your way lower and lower. You have to explore each floor to its entirety before you have the tools needed to progress downwards, with each floor getting larger and larger with different puzzles to solve throughout. The first 2 floors serve as an introduction to the dungeon, with the first being 4 rooms you work your way through counterclockwise before solving a brief puzzle to unlock floor 2. This one is ruled by the coloured red and blue switches and the turnstile system, which for me was a lot of fun. They work really well together in an interesting fashion that reminded me of Eagle's Tower from Link's Awakening. Travelling on top of the red blocks to reach the stairway leading further into the tomb was such a cool moment for me. Getting the Power Glove here and being able to pick up massive statues also felt satisfying. Not my favourite final power-up in the series, but it does its job and it has its moment during the boss fight. The puzzle of figuring out how to get every item and how to effectively move through these rooms was the biggest challenge here, and I loved it. Then the 3rd floor of the dungeon has you collecting 4 different tiles you need to place in the central room, which allows you to move to the final floor. Each of the corners of the 3rd floor have their own puzzles to solve. There's a lava puzzle where you need to pull cords to freeze the lava so you can cross it. There's an ice physics corner where you have to overcome that while fighting enemies. There's a water segment that involves the player fighting a really tough series of rapids, which I screwed up a few different times. And there's the room where you're chased by bladers that try to ram into you as you run past. It's all just really expansive, and it feels like all of your different items and skills you've picked up have a moment to shine, all leading to the final floor where you solve a puzzle with the switch hook to get the boss key, and then have a fight against Ramrock, who definitely exemplifies the theme of the dungeon, which is, as said, testing you on everything you've learned. A 4-phase boss fight in a 2D Zelda game, and the final phase involves you pulling back those balls with your new Power Glove to defeat the boss? Come on now! Easily my favourite dungeon in the game, it's just a shame the music isn't that great. But hey, nothing's perfect. Except me. And that's my list. Which Oracle of Ages dungeon is your favourite? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. I'll be taking a very short Zelda break as I still need to record The Wind Waker, and that will be the next series of games we cover. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing, thank you so much. And a massive shout out to my social medias. You can follow me over on Blue Sky. That is honestly the best place to go right now. That's where I'm most active, and it's been a lot of fun over there. So, I'll see you guys next time for another video. Adios.